Good afternoon. It is
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. It is the May 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Committee Member Harmon.
Here.
Committee Member Rouse.
Here.
Committee Chair Friedman.
Here. We do have a quorum, so before we get on to today's item, I will see if there's any general public comment for items not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee. Is there anybody in chambers wishing to speak to general public comment? Not seeing any. Is there anyone online? Please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, there are no hands raised.
I will close general public comment and turn it over to Mr. DiMartini to kick us off for today's item, which is the fiscal year 2024 recommended budget and cost recovery review policy.
Thank you very much, Chair Friedman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Keith DiMartini. I'm the city's finance director, and it is my pleasure to kick off this presentation today to discuss the proposed fee changes for the general fund departments in the city administrator's recommended budget for fiscal year 2024. The agenda for today's presentation is to review those changes with you. We have staff from each of the general fund departments that are proposing changes. They'll go through their proposed changes today. We will also provide an overview of the cost recovery and revenue policy, which was a major deliverable from the revenue working group as part of the fiscal sustainability initiative and the Vision 2030 initiative. We'll then remind the committee of the remaining budget calendar items before the Finance Committee over the next couple of weeks, make our requests to the Finance Committee, and then take any questions, public comment, and discussion. So first, let me start with the annual fee changes process that the city has. Every department reviews any proposed changes to their fees, really starting in January when we do budget kickoff with all the departments. Those fee changes will include adjusting fees to make sure that we're achieving an optimal level of cost recovery. We also work on any new fees that might be required for new services or changes of services that the city has. It also includes deleting or reducing fees where appropriate. All that reviewed is done with department staff, with the city administrator, also with various boards and commissions and committees. We are before you today in May to review those changes, and then we will be asking the city council to adopt all of those proposed fee changes when council adopts the budget in its entirety in June. All of the proposed fee changes are included in the schedule of city penalties, fees, and service charges. It's a picture of what that document looks like. There is a link to it at the bottom of this slide deck. It's on the city's finance department main homepage. It's also linked in the online budget book, the Stories budget book. So that is where the public and the council can access all of the proposed fee changes. Now let's talk about the proposed cost recovery and revenue policy. First, let's talk about really just in general what a user fee is. And this slide here summarizes that user fees are, they basically fund programs and services that provide a private benefit to an individual that might be requesting them with limited or no benefit to the community as a whole. So it might be a specific permit that an individual might require to put to do some construction work on their property, might need a permit from community development, might be a user fee for participating in a park and recreation program, things like that. State law does require that that it is an individual use of a service. It must be voluntary, so it's not a tax. Those fees must be reasonably relatable to the service that they're providing, and we are to only achieve full or a little bit less cost recovery. So there's no general or a general fund subsidy is required to make that service whole. So there might be policy considerations to not charge a fully cost recoverable fee. That's at the discretion of the city council. When that does occur, the general fund will subsidize that remaining portion. What are our fees comprised of? So this pie chart here describes the three major components of what a user fee is comprised of. The first and the sort of most obvious are the direct costs of providing that service. So for a park and recreation program, it might be the actual sort of payroll and benefit costs of the staff employee providing that service, as well as any third-party costs or materials costs, things like that. But in order to provide that service to the community, there are other sort of more indirect or other sort of overhead related costs that are required as well. City administration, the department overhead costs for just operating the city department, administrative functions, other sort of direct costs like insurance. So there's lots of costs that are sort of included in establishing a fee to really make the fully burdened cost recoverable fee. As part of Vision 2030 and the work that the Revenue Working Group has been doing, one of our charges has been to develop and propose to the City Council a cost recovery and revenue policy. And what the city does not currently have a policy like this. And this policy was attached to the council report to you today. And the major points that this policy is proposing to make is to really establish a philosophy for what is the appropriate level of cost recovery for all of the different types of services that the city provides to the community. It establishes a cost recovery criteria. It defines all of the different components that make up a user fee, and it also identifies what our annual fee change process is, which I outlined to the committee just a few slides ago. There are three major components in this policy, and they're listed here. It's those that provide an individual benefit, those that provide an individual and a public benefit, and those that provide broad public benefit. And it establishes a range of cost recovery that would be optimal to achieve in all three of those categories. And it might be best to talk through an example on each one of these categories. First, for an individual benefit, an example of that might be a park and rec program, like someone that wants to attend to swim at the pool. That is achieving an individual benefit for that person. So ideally, that fee would be fully cost recoverable. Another example might be a building permit to do some work on someone's house. Again, achieving an individual benefit for that single individual. As far as an individual and public benefit, this is where it gets a little bit of the gray area that might be not as desirable to charge 100% full cost recovery because there is some public benefit achieved. An example of that might be a permit for making sure that a water heater is braced correctly. There's sort of a public safety concern, or just making sure that the safety of the structure of the building, sort of more of a public benefit, or removing of an abandoned car, like a fee that might be associated with that. Again, there's some sort of an individual and a public benefit for fees like that. And then finally, broad public benefit would be, a good example here is the services of our police department or our fire department, where they serve the public at large. No one's really paying a fee for them going out on a call or attending to a fire. And that's why a majority of our police and fire functions are funded through general fund taxes. And so the policy describes a couple of examples of where a lot of these fees might land in these different categories. It's not 100% prescriptive though, because we have new fees that come on, some that come off, so it's not 100% prescriptive. So when we bring fees to the committee in future budget cycles, we'll do our best to sort of categorize where these fees land to give council and the finance committee some guidance on what we think the optimal level of cost recovery should be. So it's before you today. We'll ask for some feedback today, and then we'd like to send this along to the city council for adoption when we bring the budget for adoption as well. So with that, let's jump into the proposed fee changes for the general fund departments. This slide here summarizes the changes that the departments will be proposing, starting with finance, then we'll jump into human resources, the library, public works, Parks and Recreation, Police Department, and then finally Community Development. So let's start with the Finance Department. And the Finance Department is proposing a change to one existing fee and a new fee. First, we're proposing to increase the utility billing late fee from $8 to $15. We have not charged this fee since COVID began. As council may be aware, we have not disconnected any residential or commercial utility customer, that we have not disconnected their water since COVID began. That was also due to a state requirement to do so, but that requirement has since lifted, and many jurisdictions have since started these processes again with initiating late fees and also water disconnects to get all of our utility bill payers back into good standing and into compliance. This revenue source typically generates about $300,000 a year, and this fee increase is a component of the Finance Department's expenditure reduction plan, which we'll present to you in a couple of weeks. This table here summarizes what the late fees are being charged for many of the other utility jurisdictions in the greater region. Our fee of $8 is a flat fee. You can see how it compares to some of the other agencies in the greater region. You see there's many different sort of methodologies for charging a late fee. Some of them are percentage based, many of them are flat fee. When you calculate a revenue projection on sort of a typical delinquent account, that is the far right column on the right hand side. So you can see our city's late fee of $8 is actually one of the lowest compared to all of these other jurisdictions. And so that along with the amount of work it takes to follow up with accounts that are delinquent and the amount of administrative work, we're proposing to increase that fee to $15. So now the next fee that staff is proposing is a new fee for $15 for the work that it takes for staff to enter into a payment plan for, again, a utility billing account that would want to enter into one. As we mentioned earlier, we haven't charged late fees or done any disconnects since COVID began. There are a number of accounts that have racked up a little bit of a higher balance, and we want to work with them and do the best that we can to get these accounts back into compliance. And many of them will likely avail themselves of entering into a payment plan. It is administrative work to be able to do that. It is a service that many other utility jurisdictions offer. And so we would like to institute a fee that covers the costs for entering into and managing the payment plan. It's also important to note that we're moving forward with the low-income assistance program. That council will be receiving that report next Tuesday. So low-income households will be able to hopefully get some assistance for making their utility billing accounts whole, and then also applies to arrearages in their current bills. This is more information about the low-income assistance program. We plan on instituting that hopefully in mid-June for the first payments to be applied, and then reinstating the late fees come July, and then disconnects would resume. We're planning for that work to begin in September. So that concludes the Finance Department's update. I'll now turn it over to Human Resources.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman, committee members. Human Resources, go to the next slide, offers live scan, fingerprint, and background check services to the public. We started doing this at the beginning of this fiscal year, and we're proposing increasing those fees to match the police department's fee increases as well. This is the increases will go to cover increases in staff costs and other costs of the program. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Freeman, committee members. So just a brief overview of the library department's proposed fee changes. We looked at some nominal increases for some services like our copier fees. We also looked at the cost of our replacement fees to make them more in line with the actual cost of the, there we go, to make them more in line with the actual cost of the item. We've added some additional tiers to our merchandise items or our Library of Things collection as well. We are investigating passport execution and notary services. We don't actually have a launch date for that, but we wanted to get them on the fee schedule, so we are prepared for that, to launch that. And we looked at an overhaul of our venue rentals and exhibit space fees as well. Next slide, please. So library service fee charges, like I mentioned earlier, the black and white copies and color copies, those fees haven't been updated in several years. So we did increase those to cover the cost of the copier supplies. We looked at replacement fees such as books on CD and laptop, and those are based on costs to just cover the actual replacement of the item. Interlibrary loan fees, so that is when we borrow things from like outside of the state or a college library. We are proposing to increase the cost of that to cover the additional postage fees and staff time in processing those items. There's also something on here, the USB flash drive. We're noticing less and less people actually requesting to purchase those, so we're proposing to reduce that fee and then phase it out completely. And then again, the passport execution fee and the notary services. So those are two services that we are looking into to generate revenue. So we're not prepared to launch that yet, but we did want to get them onto the fee schedule. Next slide. So our venue fee changes. So we have noticed since the COVID capacity restrictions have been lifted that there is a high demand for all of our venues, even during the library being under construction. So we really had to look at our fee structure there to see what we could do. So we wanted to make it also more in line with other departments. So we looked at Parks and Rec and other local agencies, looked at things like weekend rates, charging fees for out of the service area, things like that. And so we increased our rates based on those comparisons. So we came up with a standard rate. We also have a nonprofit rate, which would be a 50% discount off of the standard rate. We included an out-of-service area rate, so this would be a 25% increase to the standard rate. And our outside of our service area, we're using our Library Zone 1 designation that is addressed in the countywide agreement. And then a commercial rate. This is something we haven't had in the past. For those who want to sell items out of one of our venues or are looking at doing a fundraising event, we are proposing to rent the spaces to those individuals at a 50% increased rate. Next slide, please. So these are our indoor venue rental rates. So we've included the Faulkner Gallery, Main, our smaller Faulkner galleries, East and West, our Library Tech Lab, and the MLK room at the East Side Library. So you'll see how, for example, the first one, the Faulkner Gallery, Main, the rate increases from $100 an hour. We're proposing to $150 an hour with a 2-hour minimum. So that would be the standard rate. The nonprofit rate goes down to $75. That's at a 50% discount. The out-of-service area, again mentioning, that's at a 25% increased rate. So we're proposing that that goes up to $190 per hour. And then the commercial rate is raised at a 50% increase. So that's a $225 per hour increase. And then we also are proposing that if someone rents 2 or more of the Faulkner Gallery spaces, that they do receive a 20% discount off of those spaces. Next slide, please. And then we have our exterior library spaces, our Michael Tobes Library Plaza rental rates. We are well under construction, and so we already have people inquiring about the rental of those exterior spaces. So, for example, our first space, the Michael Tobes Library Plaza, so that's our main library plaza right now, our upper plaza, proposing that rate to be $250 an hour with a 2-hour minimum. And then again, there's still a nonprofit rate at a 50% discount of $125 per hour. Our out-of-service area rate, again, 25% increase at $315 per hour, and then the commercial rate raised at 50% for the sale of items on the library plaza at $375 an hour. We've also added a new space. We have the Methuen Storytime Square, which we didn't have before. So that's the space that's directly outside of our historic library doors right there on Anapamu. Next slide, please. And then we have some optional add-ons for indoor and outdoor spaces. So these are related to direct cost recovery for these items. For example, a cleaning fee, we are proposing to increase from $125 to $135. So that would be for people who have food and beverage at their events, and this is for the direct cost to actually clean those spaces when those events are finished. A setup fee from $90 to $100. So this is a cost recovery for the staff time that it takes to set up the interior, exterior spaces for tables and chairs. Those who are renting the spaces will have the option still to set up the space on their own, and we will provide tables and chairs free of charge. And then also for audio-visual setup as well. More and more people are requesting use of the sound system and projector. So this is the time, the staff time it takes to set up and manage that equipment. Next slide. We also had to do an overview of our exhibit fees. So the library is actually proposing to take on the management of the exhibit space as well as the sale of art at the library. So we are proposing to combine the exhibit rental fee with the cost of having the 3-hour first Thursday reception. We feel that this would simplify the process for the artists instead of having to go through 2 separate application processes for rental of the space and then to host a reception. We are just going to make it one all-inclusive price that includes not only the monthly exhibit, but as well as the first Thursday reception as well. We also are trying to avoid rogue hosting of unpaid receptions. There are many times where we've walked into the Faulkner Gallery and noticed that there was a reception being held that the exhibitor did not go through the proper channels or process to actually rent that space. So making it inclusive with the exhibit rentals, that would avoid that problem. Also included in that price is the library staff will market art exhibitions. So the library department has a very robust marketing for all of our events and programs, and we would include the art in that marketing as well. And we really feel that this would be a true value-added service for the artist and as well as the library. The library will also facilitate the sale of art and earn a 20% commission off of the sale of art, 25% if paid by credit card, and that is to offset the fees that we pay when someone does use a credit card. And this is still an affordable rate for artists, as many local galleries do take a 30% commission or more. So this is a more streamlined process that could be beneficial both for the artist and the library as well. And we still are below the market rate for many local galleries. The other factor in this is that we can ensure proper business practices for the sale of art. When people are selling art in the library, we can ensure that they actually have a business license to carry that out. And so you'll see the increase. Currently in FY23, we are only charging just for the exhibit space, $750. So with the addition of the 3-hour room rental and the marketing fee, the price goes up to $1,800 for the large Faulkner Gallery and $600 for the smaller Faulkner galleries. But that is because that includes not only the monthly exhibit, but it also includes the 3-hour first Thursday reception, and our marketing team will promote the exhibit as well in the community. That's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. I'm Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in the Public Works Department. I don't have quite as much to go over with you today as Ms. Hernandez in the library. Public Works has a 5% recommended across the board fee increase, match our cost of service increases for the last year in the Consumer Price Index. So all of our fees are going up 5%. Engineering is currently recovering all of our costs for plan check and inspection services, which is great. Transportation planning might be looking at doing a fee study next fiscal year. I think Mr. Hamilton may be going a little bit over some of that with community development upcoming, but 5% across the board for Public Works, plan check, and inspection. Thank you.
I think that's one too many. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. There are several factors that we take into consideration when reviewing the proposed fee changes for the Parks and Recreation Department. Within all the fees that are charged, there's 13 categories, all which offer a range of fees from resident to non-resident. We have programs, service agreements, activities, classes, facility rentals, and lease agreements within those 13 categories. For fiscal year '24, the department is proposing 9 new fees, the restructuring, discontinuation, or consolidation of 55 fees, and 71 moderate increases and or decreases. Things that are taken into consideration with this process is, are we able to maximize participation? We want to set those prices to serve as many program participants as possible, finding that right balance between cost recovery and having people enjoy those programs and services that are offered. Do they offer a community benefit? Are we achieving the goal of reaching a target audience? Are we priced within the competition from other programs or services that are similar and that are offered? And of course, cost recovery. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of some recommended fee changes. We have proposed 4% increases to neighborhood center facility leases. These are nonprofit operations that rent space in the community centers, the West Side Community Center, the Franklin Community Center. These increases are proposed to offset higher operating costs such as custodial services, increased water costs, and landscaping. And you'll see that this is very much a theme with any of our facility rentals. Summer camps, there's an 11% average increase across all the various camps that are offered. The range is 5% to 25%, and these increases vary based on increased staffing costs. Some camps are proposing extended length of service, field trips that are offered, the different materials and activities that are within those camps that are offered, and also a 5% average increase to the facility rental fees, again, due to the increased operating costs. Next slide, please. Other recommended fee changes that we're bringing before you, you'll see that we are proposing to have one permit fee for tennis and pickleball rather than 2 separate fees. The increase would be on the pickleball side. The tennis is already at $139, so we're proposing to increase to have one fee at $139. This combined fee allows equal access to all courts. If purchased at the beginning of the year, the value is 38 cents per day for unlimited play with access to tennis courts and pickleball courts. And this would help with achieving cost recovery for staffing, landscaping, custodial, water, other operating costs that are associated with this activity. Additionally, we're proposing increases to the adult and senior lap swim, 10 visits. It'll go from 58 to 68 for adults, 44 to 50 for seniors. And we're proposing increases to the unlimited monthly adult and senior rates. Again, with the increased cost of operating expense with chemicals for the pool, for example, as we went through the storms this fall, every single time we had these storms, we would have to rebalance the pools. So we have increased chemical costs, staffing costs, all of those items. So we feel that this is help us to achieve that cost recovery. And also proposing under tree removals and permits and appeal fees. The goal here would be to better align with other departments and what is being charged for the removal of trees. Right now, the proposal is to increase from $75 to $325 for street tree applications, $75 to $125 for setback trees, and $105 on the appeal fee to increase to $845. Again, this is a cost recovery initiative. Approximately $610 of staff time per application is what it's actually costing right now when we receive these applications. So you'll see that even though we are proposing increases in this area, we are still not quite where we would want to be with full cost recovery in this category. We're proposing the lesser fee for the setback trees because these trees are private assets as opposed to city assets with the street trees. So we want to encourage private individuals to go through the application process and make sure that they're still applying for the permits rather than doing the work that's necessary without going through that channel. Next slide, please. In addition to the fee for service or cost recovery fees that we charge, the Parks and Recreation Department still offers free programs that are general fund subsidized. The Summer Fun Program, Recreation Swim, Food Distribution, Youth Apprentice, Arts Alliance. These are all free programs that are still proposed to be operating and run within the department in the next fiscal year. Additionally, the department offers scholarship opportunities for the Recreation After School program. We have the Campership Alliance with SB PAL and youth swim lessons. Last year in fiscal year 22, let's see, I have some numbers. The summer of 22 camp offered 151 scholarships that were valued at $51,272. So here's an example of how we try to subsidize youth programming and activity wherever possible. And this was contributed also leveraged through the program delivery vendors that we utilize, as well as general fund contributions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lori Peterson, Business Manager at the Police Department. Want to go through our fees real quickly. We've done a broader reach through our fees to look at where we needed to make adjustments because it had been at least 2 years since the last time we had changed any of our fees. We're going to look at the appeals, staffing rates, alarms, parking violations, live scan, and we'll also have the concealed carry weapon permit fees as well. In the first one, we're talking about changing the appeal fees for both dance permits and taxi permits, and they're just going up from $100 to $500 for fire and police commission, and from $150 to $750 for a council consideration. This is really to reflect the amount of time that staff is required to put these packets together to make sure that the application has been put together and presented cleanly to the committee so that they can review it. So that increase is significant, but it reflects the staff time. Next slide. On the next one, we are looking at increasing our rates for staff time, again, just to reflect the rates of actual salaries and bringing that up to speed on that one. And the next one, we made some significant changes in the false alarm registration fee area. The application fee is being proposed to go up by $10. That hasn't gone up in at least 10 years for that part. Again, the amount of time that staff needs just to make sure that everybody's got their systems in place and receives that and process the registrations. On the penalty side, for those who have registered alarms, after their first 2 false alarms, then the fees for responding to a false alarm are increasing. And then for non-registered alarm fees, those fees are increasing with the very first false alarm. And with that process, after the first false alarm, they're contacted, they're given the opportunity to apply and get their alarm system registered. We are still having people who resist that process, and so they'll continue to get false alarms, and so the fees will continue to accrue until they come into compliance by actually submitting their application and being online with us. The next slide. The next slide is taxi cab permit fees. We made just some minor changes in the application process. The owner's application permit, just to replace that, we increased that just again because of the supplies. Those have gone up in the last couple of years, just the stickers to make sure that they're good and last a long time. We've also increased the initial application fee and the renewal fee, again, just to reflect more the staff time and the cost as part of that process. Next slide. The largest change that we made is in our parking violation area. We increased all parking violations by $5. We haven't raised the fees in 2.5 or 3 years. The one exception to that is that we've increased the rates for disabled parking violations from $353 to $400 because that offense, it's really impactful to the people who need to have those spaces available, and so that fee went up. We are also going to one correctable violation fee. It used to be $10 and $25. We're going to just a $10 standard fee for any correctable violation, which would be things like registration tags, actual registration of a vehicle, missing front plates. So those will all be $10. And then a new fee for us is a correctable violation sign-off fee. And basically what that is coming in and having those violations. We do it for other agencies as well. You bring it in, oh, you've got your front plate in place now. That will now actually be a fee to go out and verify that it's been corrected. Next slide. The next slide, we increased fingerprint live scan services for nonprofits, and then regular categories, and then additional card fees, again, just to reflect the amount of staff time for each of those processes. We're increasing the vehicle release fees. I don't think we've increased those fees in at least 10 years as well. So we went from a $160 to $175, and then $215 to $250, which is for an unlicensed driver. So that includes the initial $175 plus the additional fee for being an unlicensed driver. And then we are just moving the ABC permit endorsement fee into this area because we no longer have a special events section. And then, is there one more? And then this will be our new fees for carrying. And it is a program that the county used to provide all the permits for carried concealed weapons. And we now, as the county is no longer providing that service for city residents, we have taken that program on. And these are the fees related to that process. And that's, we'll leave the end. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman, Mayor Rouse, Committee Member Harmon. My name is James Hamilton. I'm the Community Development Business Manager, and I'll be presenting the fiscal year 2024 Community Development fee changes. In Community Development, we have two broad categories of fee changes in fiscal year 2024. Like Public Works, we have a 5% fee increase across the board for planning and building and safety. This fee is necessary to keep pace with the operational increases in costs that we're seeing. You've heard in other budget meetings, salaries, benefits, overhead costs, we're seeing substantial increases in those, and the 5% increase is necessary to maintain pace. The second category of fee changes that we have is we have just a few new and reintroduced fees, and I'm going to get into those in the coming slides. And I'll pause here for just a second. I want to make the committee and the public aware that additional detail on these fee changes is available at santabarbaraca.gov/CD fees. You can find a narrative explanation, additional documentation, a marked up fee schedule, as well as the most recent fee studies that were done. So in terms of those other two categories of fee changes that we have, the first that I'm going to discuss, and there's just two fees in this area, are reintroduced fees. In fiscal year 20, for a reason that staff is not aware, these two fees were taken off the fee schedule. They're related to cellular mobile phone antenna services. Any fee that isn't specifically identified on the fee schedule is charged at the applicable hourly rate. So staff is adding these services back to the fee schedule to provide transparency and add clarity to the cost of this service, and not have the customers just wondering what that fee might be. So it's really just for transparency and clarity. Next slide, please. And then we have two new fees that we're bringing for fiscal year 24 as well. And these two fees are introducing a lower price point for small residential remodel projects, both room and kitchen and bath remodel. At the direction of the CD director, the chief building official, and the building counter and plan check supervisor, they brought to me an idea to introduced this lower price point. This is something that they were working on previously and also feel is responsive to feedback that we've received from public commenters and customers. And what this does is it introduces a price point that is half of really what the existing price point is. We previously had a range on square footage that went from 0 to 300. This is up to 150 and introduces a new fee that is half the cost. And I think the only other thing that I would add regarding community development fees, not related to this slide specifically, but in response to Mr. Hendel's comment on the fee study, we do have an intention of bringing a fee study forward. We do have an item for that in our budget. Not something I was prepared to talk about today. I'm actually meeting tomorrow with the land development team supervisors just to get an idea of their capacity to take that on and talk about timing, but we'll discuss that in further detail at the budget presentation on May 24th. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff, for presenting all your proposed changes. Just to wrap up here, this slide summarizes where we've been at the Finance Committee, where we are today, and then the next 2 meetings ahead of us. Next week, we'll be here again, same time, same place, to review the Enterprise Fund Department proposed fee changes. And then in 2 weeks, we'll go through the general fund tax and revenue assumptions built into the recommended budget for the next 2 years, and then really discuss what the Finance Committee would like to recommend as far as approving the fee changes, any staff recommended adjustments to the budget, and then ask for your final decisions to recommend to the City Council to be included in the budget. And with that, the request before you today is to hear a report from staff in regards to the general fund fee changes, and then we're happy to receive your feedback, your comments on the cost recovery and revenue policy. That concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. DiMartini and staff, for the presentations. Before I get into questions, if there are any members of the public who wish to speak to this, please turn in your speaker slip to Jen over there, and she'll get it up to me. And then if you are online, please feel free to raise your hand in the app. And so now I'll open up to questions. Any questions from my colleagues? Member Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Just two. The first, Mr. DiMartini, I'll start with you on the cost recovery and revenue policy. Just trying to make sure that I understand how this is going to work. Sorry, it's slide 7. So this framework makes sense to me, but so much of where things would fit in this are policy questions. Even just the policy or the example that you gave, like swimming or the use of pools, right? There may be a community interest in having a healthy community. So is what you're saying that you're going to use this as a way to make recommendations, and then all of them come through council and we say, yes, this goes in this bucket, or no, it goes in a different? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, Committee Member Harmon, that's basically the intent of this policy. It's really meant to be a guideline. Now, this policy was drafted by taking and utilizing existing policies that many cities already have in place. We're not the first to do this. And it's based on best practices with just sort of government cost recovery concepts. And so it's meant to sort of categorize, kind of bracket the types of services that we offer as a city organization to the community, recognizing that some of our services are for the pure benefit of the public, right? But some of them are for an individual benefit. So it's really meant to provide a framework, a guideline for staff to use to develop a fee recommendation to the council, and also for the council to use when considering, is that an appropriate fee? Is there more of a public benefit than maybe staff might be considering? Is there a need for a higher degree of subsidy or a lower degree based on your consideration? So it's really meant to be a framework.
Awesome, thank you, that's very helpful. And then my next question actually might be for Ms. Connect. And this may be one that you say we're gonna have to talk about another time, so I'm sorry in advance. I just had a question about the conceal carry permit process. And from what I understand, this is no longer happening at the county for city residents, so that is why we're taking it on. Are we constitutionally required to receive those permits and grant them? Is that, I mean, I know there was the Supreme Court case that said you can't ask for a reason why you want it, but could we say we're just not going to process those applications?
Chair Harmon, it's my understanding, and I will need to get back to you for more clarity on this, but it's my understanding that we are obligated to process the permits. That doesn't mean that in all instances we have to approve them, but I do think we have a requirement to process them, which is why we are now establishing the fee in order to do that. We wanted actually to come forward with you and establish the fee in this fiscal year, but it looks like we were going to have to wait for next fiscal year. But I do think we have an obligation to process under the Constitution. I think that is the requirement now. But I will follow up with you just to get
Yeah,
back
I
and
mean, and I would just say
confirm
that
that.
may be something that you and I can explore, because I'm interested in how the county can say, we don't want to process anymore, and
for
the city,
city residents.
and then the city thereby be required. We don't have to get into it now.
Yeah.
And
see.
Chief, maybe you have a comment, but this is something I'm interested, before we move forward, to set up fees. If we don't have to do it at all.
I didn't realize that
for
the
it.
chief was standing right behind me. So,
just
yeah,
walked up.
she's probably way more qualified
There's
to
a
address
reason that I
this,
came to the meeting today.
address this than me. So I'm going to turn it over to the chief.
Thank you.
Yes, we are obligated, and we are not the only city. Every city across the entire state where the county was doing it. So in LA County, same issue happened. Sheriff used to do it. Now the city that I used to work for, every city is going through this process because of recent case law that is now requiring us all to do this. So we're legally obligated to have this process. We have to take the applications, and there is now very specific case law on that dictates when they can be approved and when they cannot be approved. So we had to, just like, unfortunately, most cities are struggling with, when we had the ability to allow the sheriff's department to do that. But like I said, even LA County, the sheriff's department used to do that for a lot of cities, and now all the smaller cities are having to do the same thing as we are here.
Can I ask, thank you, Chief, that's helpful. Why, and then I'll stop, I promise. Why are the sheriff's departments no longer doing it? Is it because local jurisdictions are required individually, or because sheriff's departments say we don't? I'm just trying to understand why it's coming to us versus staying at the sheriff's like it's always been.
A lot of the sheriff's departments used to do it because it was a much smaller number, so they were willing to do it for the cities.
Okay.
And it was usually done through an established MOU. It wasn't just out of the goodness of their heart. But with this new change in case law, now the numbers that we're all expecting, the sheriff's department can't process all of those. And so now individual cities are all having to do this. And coming up with a process for it. So this has been a process for us to come up with a process, and then establishing fees so that we can at least cost recover to the extent that we can cost recover, because it is an extensive amount of work and an extensive process for us to now have and to do. So that's the purpose of this, is at least to try to cost recover every piece of that we can. Because there are still parts of it that by law and by statute we can't recover.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief. And then finally, just for you, quick follow-up, and we are not allowed, so, when thinking about the policy piece, you're saying there may be things that we want to subsidize more or less, depending on our policy. We can't go above cost recovery if we wanted to, say, disincentivize a certain action.
Right. Committee Member Harmon, that is correct. We cannot charge, for a user fee, we cannot charge more than the cost to provide the fee. Really, it's truly is the fully burdened cost, though. As I said earlier, it's not just the direct expense to provide that service for maybe that one employee that's providing the service. It's the fully burdened cost of what it takes to support that person, our IT systems, our insurance, like truly a fully burdened cost. When a situation like that were to occur, it becomes a tax. And so we are governed by state law that we just can't legally do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Friedman.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, any questions?
Yes, thank you. So, Mr. DiMartini, as long as we're having fun with slide 7, let's go back to that, please, in terms of cost recovery. So let's use an also equally fun example of last Tuesday. So had we had a policy in place and we had a determined cost for what we were doing, would that policy have pretty much preceded that conversation we just That's what we have to do. And in the same light, when we do determine our schedule of costs that we need to recover, will those be fixed? Will they be determined? How do we determine those I mean, that was kind of a loosely in a bizarre case, but it would have been nice to have not had that conversation last Tuesday. And be interesting to see if that policy were in place, would that have truncated that entire process?
Mayor Rouse, I believe that if the policy were in place prior to the action the council took on the outdoor facility fee, staff would have done the same thing. Staff has a responsibility and an obligation to present what would be a fully recoverable cost for a service such as that to the council for consideration. But ultimately, it's the council's decision if they choose to approve of a fee that differs from the fully cost recoverable rate, which
As
effectively
long
is
as
the
we don't
action that
exceed
council
cost
took.
recovery, right?
Correct. Yeah, staff would not propose that in that case either. We would not have done that.
Okay, very good. So, going to the, we talked about the tree removal fee, I don't know who's to address that, but, and I see that the street tree fee went up substantially, but not honorously, but the appeal went up, which I think is probably a good thing because we do want people to respect the process. But I was wondering, when I looked at community development slides, we did not talk about, I'm sorry about that, I was just thinking about, people that avoid the process if the process or the expense for the process is so onerous that they just, I'm just gonna try to get away with it, right? So with community development, which is famous for that kind of thing, there wasn't a mention of the appeal schedule in this, and there's a substantial cost to various kinds of appeals. Is that something that we would discuss at this level?
I think discussion of the appeal fee would be tabled for the fee study that's coming up. So
Okay.
I've looked at some documentation through our annual update. We increased the appeal fee 5% just to kind of keep pace with the increasing cost of service. However, in looking at what we charge for the appeal fee and what the appeal fee has actually been costed at, when I looked at, there was 2 instances where it had thorough costing had been done. It was in the $10,000 to $14,000 range when incorporating city attorney, mayor, council, community development staff time, and our current fee is somewhere around 800, and it's around the cost that they
No,
have on
and
that.
I understand that because it'd be so onerous that an individual probably would not take that on. And their expectation of more success would be also a lot higher if they put down $10,000 or $14,000. But I understand there's a tremendous amount of expense involved.
And I think there's a more full conversation to be had on how you provide a price point to not have a deterrent, right? You don't want somebody who's doesn't have the economic means to not be able to file an appeal. So I think there's a more full conversation that needs to happen around that fee.
And the last thing is on the building safety issue with the fees for the smaller remodels. Who was presented that? Was that?
That
was
was
you.
me. I have some.
Yeah, no,
building
but I'm
safety
just
stuff.
thinking, I go, I think when we present that to the public, it needs to probably be even more clear what exactly we've done, because that is the narrative we're trying to go forward with. So make it very clear that that's a dramatic reduction and that's a response to what we've been hearing about with community development. So I would just like to see us go forward and do that more robustly.
Appreciate that feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, most of my questions were all answered by all of you, so I'll just save mine to comments afterwards. So right now, is there anyone from the public who turned in a slip or would like to speak to this item? Nobody in the chambers. Is there anyone online who wishes to speak to this item? Please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right. No public comment, so I will turn it over to my colleagues to comments and to make a motion. So who's up first?
Chair Friedman, if I may, there is no action required of the committee.
Oh, I thought we
today.
were going to recommend it to council,
That'll-
but we're
the
doing it at the end.
recommendation will
That's
occur
right.
on May 16th.
That's right. All right, comments.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'll be relatively brief. I really appreciate this. I mean, this is always a hard thing to do, you know? These conversations are never pleasant. when we talk about fees anytime. Certainly not pleasant when we're talking about having to increase them, but, we provide really high-quality services, and in order to continue doing that and to ensure that everyone in our community has access to those high-quality services, the fees have to reflect the actual costs. So it's difficult, and again, I really don't like it. This is one of my least favorite things that we do, and I think that discomfort is reflected in the community as well. Nobody likes this, but there are important conversations to have, and I appreciate you all outlining them so we can think through in the coming weeks as we look at the budget, and it's really helpful. I would say the one piece of feedback, the one thing that really stood out for me, aside from the concealed carry issue, which is obviously constitutional and out of our jurisdiction, is the utility late fees. And while I understand the amount of work required to deal with the late fees and the interest in incentivizing folks paying on time, I am not comfortable with what seems to me to be a poverty penalty. And I think about who would be likely to be late on their utility bills and who would be likely to be disproportionately more burdened by higher fees. Who is likely to struggle more with an additional fee on top of a payment plan? To me, I understand we're trying to balance the reality of staff time and how much that costs with another reality, which is those that are going to be most affected by these increased fees are those who are least able to bear that increase. So I don't know what the answer is right now, and I will think about that and try to come up with something, because I realize it's $300,000 in additional generated money that we're looking at. That's not nothing, but when I think about where that $300,000 is likely to be coming from in our community, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure. So with all that said, I'm not comfortable with that at this moment in time. I'm not sure that I can support those increases, but I will say to you all and publicly that I will think long and hard about where that money and time can come from, because I also recognize that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that the work that you do has a cost associated with it. So I put that out there and would request that my colleagues and staff as well think about that. If there are other alternatives, I would love to hear them. The answer may be that there are no other alternatives, and we can cross that bridge. But I guess that's just where I am on that in this moment, and I will be thinking about that as we move forward in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I guess my only comment is that as we gauge these different fee recoveries, that we try to keep in mind that we want to have participation and compliance in everything we do. So when things get onerous or overly complicated or expensive, oftentimes the public will try to skip them altogether. So there's that balance. And like it was the matter of the appeal, for example, the real cost is probably over $10,000 to really go all the way through the appeal. Well, that would also preclude a lot of the public from getting their ability to put their 2 cents in. So, and I know staff tries to do that. I mean, we get things like, why is my permit to my sewer lateral this much money, or a new water meter this much money? And those kinds of clarifications and justifications, I think, would be nice if they were, defined somewhere, somehow. And then going back to slide 7 again, where we had these different tiers of why we recover a certain percentage of a cost of certain things. And I don't know if we're going to catalog, for example, services and say this falls here, falls there. I don't know how defined we want to make that. But it would be nice to have a clear policy that we followed, so we did not have the game show, as Mr. Friedman liked to put it, as we do these different kinds of fee assessments going forward. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll just say I'm generally supportive of what is being outlined today. The issue with the parks fees, this always comes up when we're, for summer camps in particular, is when we're raising the fees to ensure that we're not leaving out families. And I know there's opportunities for scholarships, but to the extent that we have fully considered any impacts that might have on the fees to get a lot of the families in there. And if there's other opportunities as well, I just don't want, especially when you have a lower income, that a lot of times they rely on those for the summer and their enrichment opportunities, and they might be priced out. I just want to ensure that this doesn't lead us in that direction. Kind of along the same lines as the utilities as well. Utilities, I think Council or Member Harmon raises a good point. I also understand why staff's doing it as well, because if you don't have some type of way to get the payments and get a plan going, then that cost burden gets shifted to the other ratepayers, the other utility users, and so there needs to be an incentive to get people to come in and make a payment plan over time. And that's what this is trying to do, is not make it all in arrears right away, but get it so it moves forward, and that cost burden isn't shifted to other users. But at the same time, Member Harmon raises a good point. So the extent that we can deal with that or get more clarification when that comes to council. And then the mayor mentioned it with the appeals process. Some of these fees are jumping from $100 to $700, but then we heard the appeal can be $14,000 of our staff time. But then we also get into the issue where if we make them too high, then if you're wealthy enough, you could pay it. But if you have a legitimate issue and it's going to cost you a few $1,000s and it's something that affects your whole neighborhood, then that could preclude you from exercising your rights to have it too. So I don't know where the sweet spot is, but if it goes too high, especially if it's a project on appeal that has implications for an entire neighborhood, that they wouldn't have that ability because of the cost. I wouldn't want to have legitimate neighborhood issues not get their fair day at a council if cost was the issue. And same with the trees as well. For example, going to the Street Tree Advisory Committee and having a 3-2 versus a 5-0, that's a lot. That's a big difference. So, but at the same time, they need to be able to exercise their ability to come to the council. That's why we're here in that. But at the same time, if it's too low, then everybody appeals, and there's no disincentive to really do your homework and make sure that it's just not there to drive up the cost for your neighbor or something. So, but I trust staff has looked into those numbers, but just that's things that are on my radar when I'm looking at those fees. So with that, there is no action today, so I feel like I can abstain, Mr. Mayor. So we'll, but I won't be abstaining when it comes back to us in a couple meetings from now. So with that, this meeting is closed.